This presentation is about GM and agriculture. Our key questions today: what are the advantages of producing GM organisms? And what are the disadvantages of producing GM organisms? We know that insects eat crops. The crop provides food for us, farm animals, and lots of insects such as aphids. When an insect eats a crop, it reduces our yield by over 10%. So what is a pest? A pest is an animal or a plant that is unwanted. They're unwanted because they cause damage to your crops. Insects are pests. So insect pests cause damage to the crop by feeding on the tissues. Plant pests, known as weeds, often outcompetes your crop plants for nutrients, for shade, for water, and for minerals. Insects are pests. The only way to treat an insect is with an insecticide, which kills it. Insecticides only work if they touch the insect. During the early 1900s, there was a bacteria known as Bacillus thuringiensis, and this bacillus species, Bt for short, produced a toxin called Bt toxin. This is a natural insecticide protein, and crystals of the toxin can be sprayed onto crops as an insecticide. In 1985, the gene for Bt toxin was introduced into plants. The first plant was on tobacco plant. This was very easy to genetically modify. Once you put the gene into the plant, all of the cells are then able to manufacture the Bt toxin, which is the natural insecticide. Corn borers will feed on corn. If we engineer the GM Bt toxin into every single one of these cells, then the corn borer, when it chews on the cells, will experience the toxin. Therefore, they won't be able to feed on the corn because they will die if they eat it. This is good news because other species, such as spiders and ladybirds, are predators in the area that would normally feed on other insects like the corn borer. They are unaffected because they don't chew on the corn and release the toxin when the cells are broken. However, this is also true of other species like aphids, which are greenfly. These will suck from the cells and remove the juices, but they won't actually chew on the tissue, so they are not affected by GM Bt toxin. The only way to get rid of these is to have an insecticide. There is a disadvantage, however, of breeding GM Bt toxin into the crops. Eventually, over time, the insects may develop a resistance. Because they develop a resistance to it, they are unaffected when they eat the corn. Fortunately, there are many different strains or varieties of the bacteria which produce slightly different forms of the toxin. New versions of the GM crop plants can be developed to replace the varieties that the pests are resistant to. Many different GM crops have been produced that contain new genes that make them resistant to a range of pests, as well as to some herbicides. GM crop seeds are more expensive than non-GM varieties, but farmers usually make more profit by growing the GM varieties, as long as people are willing to buy food from GM crops. Some people are worried that eating GM crops could harm their health, although there is no evidence currently to suggest that this is the case. Others worry that new genes might transfer to other crops or to wild plants by pollination, but research suggests that this happens very rarely.